Hello everyone, welcome back to A Few Good Frames. Sorry for the prolonged hiatus. Been off doing random stuff, but I'm back. And today we're going to be taking a look at Stranger Things Season 4. It also appears I've lost my tripod for my iPhone, so today it's just going to be the voice. But let's jump into it, try to make these a little bit more concise. We're going to start with a couple of frames and checking out the vector scope to see kind of the saturation level, where the colors are resting, and stuff like that. So if we start with this image, we can see it's textbook blue and orange. Orange coming from the skin right here, and also from these little accents here. And it's really pushing orange pretty heavily. These are our kind of legal value range, the outskirts. And so blue is really blue, really saturated blue. It's coming from these overhead LEDs. And then down in the floor, kind of bouncing off that. And there's one presumably just over her head right here. You can see it kind of up here on her head. Got an LED just above. Really blue. And there's probably a light just up here. You can tell by the way the shadow's falling off here, and the way these spots just up here are a bit brighter, and then they fall off. So you have probably something that looks just like this, like just above her, creating that nice blue up here, and then probably another light coming just in front of that, closer to the camera side, coming down toward her. You can kind of see it in her eye. So it's presumably, I don't know, maybe a foot in front of her, if I had to guess. Something like that. And it's coming almost straight down. You can see from the shadows, the angle of the shadow here. So it's pretty high. And then down here, shadows are pretty angled, straight down almost. So you have a nice, almost a hair light right here, kind of wrapped around to fill in this side just a little bit. Kind of help bring some of that light back in. So this side of the face isn't completely black. And then yeah, very saturated. Very, very saturated image. In terms of values, it's pretty standard with most of the stuff we're looking at, where right at about 50% and below is where most of the values are resting. And some of the brightest parts, especially on the skin, are around that value. So 50 IRE is very common place to put skin tones. And that's been the same through every single thing we've looked at. Brightest parts are up here. They're touching pure white, but you still have some information there. So pure white. A couple things touching near pure black, but nothing quite crushed. So you have a lot of contrast just in here. 50 and below. That's where most of the image is sitting, with some of these other accents appearing up here, mainly just off this. And then the quality of light is relatively soft. There's quite a bit of wraparound, especially you can see it here. Not quite as harsh. There's probably some negative fill, especially filling in down here. Imagine somebody put probably negative fill right here to help fill in this side of the face with shadow. But there's a hair light probably right here coming this way and wrapping around the side of the face, just to separate it a little bit. You can see it on the ear as well. A little bit of light. And I think that just about does it for that image. Nothing, nothing too crazy. I'm just gonna check that I am recording. Okay, and I am. All right, so for this image, let's start with some of the colors. All right, so same thing, very, very saturated, more saturated than the other image. We can also see blue and orange. Once again, not as strong here because there's not a strong enough presence of blue, but with the costume design, there is some in here, but you can see kind of cyan. It's stretching down here. Then you have a lot of orange, yellowish colors with this strong tungsten bulb here, and then obviously the skin tones. Skin tones resting right on that skin tone line. No matter what the skin tone is, that's where all skin tones rest. So it's pretty easy just to throw in some tungsten lights, push some blue, either with set design or costume design, and you have teal and orange. Okay, so this practical is doing a lot of work. There's probably I'd say this is mostly just the practical. I mean, there's definitely a light coming in from probably back here. You can see it hitting Max's face to fill in all this ambient. There's also one coming from this way because you can see the shadow here. So there's probably two lights shooting through here to fill in all this ambient space. And that's probably doing a lot to lift the shadows in this area. And there's probably a light between the camera and this. You can see kind of a reflection here. And this is actually in front of the table here. So you wouldn't have this reflection unless there was probably a big sheet up here, big softbox, or big 8x8 grid. Probably just shooting down at the exact same color temperature, helping to soften all this up. And then kind of like this one, this is very symmetrical. Everything's centered off of Eddie. This isn't, almost looks like a Wes Anderson frame. So a little bit atypical with the composition, but still looks very, very nice. Same thing with the values. Most stuff here is 50% or below. So nothing quite crushed, but there's nothing quite at white either. This right here is probably just at 95% IRE. But most of this image is resting 50% or below. Brightest part of people's skin tone still quite low. Eddie's face being the most lit, probably on this side, and even that is not at 50%. So very dark, very moody, all these images. Very blue, very, very blue. This one's definitely pushing more toward proper blue than cyan, but obviously because there's a motivation for that, these little bulbs here. Once again, well, this one isn't quite exactly like that in terms of composition, but just a two-shot, pretty standard, lots of headroom, makes them look small. Also shows off this, the window here, just to shoot light through. Same thing with this. I mean, you're shooting, I think this was nighttime. This is probably an outside street lamp or something. I think the scene was nighttime. So, you know, typically 50% and below. This one you're looking at mostly 20% and below. Brightest parts of their faces, like probably 15, 20 IRE. Right in here, so very dark. Makes sense for a nighttime scene. Let's see exactly what we're at. Yeah, very low. Everything you're looking at, 15 and below. It's very, very dark. Very dark. Not too much for that image. Okay, so with this, Pretty much the same as the other ones. I bet this one doesn't have as much saturation. Yeah, not too much. Very blue, even up here in the ambience. Very blue. It's kind of neutralizing that blue out. It's a very kind of blue-greenish kind of shot. You see lots of the colors pushing towards cyan. Let me grab this right quick. Yeah, look up here in the highlights. That prevalence of blue-green compared to red. That's how you can tell. It's pushing a bit more toward that. And it's just slightly corrected. Very tiny adjustments. You guys aren't going to be able to tell. Maybe if I go to full screen, especially here, kind of in the shadows on Eddie, you can see how green, bluish it was. And correct it out. They kind of look sickly here. And corrected. A little bit more natural. But yeah, very compositionally they have the light obviously coming in through here, but they also have one presumably to the front of this RV as well, shooting through, very soft. The camera is positioned on the shadow side of the face, so you know it'd be hard to recreate, but if the camera were on the other side and you're just seeing this side of the face, which is evenly lit, you wouldn't have kind of a structured face like this is. And you have highlights over here going into shadow, making his face a little bit more 3D. You could help enhance that by having like a backlight back here, but they don't. It's just into shadow, and it kind of, you know, bleeds him into the background a little bit more, but that's, you know, completely fine. They could have had this light on, and maybe like tungsten. They could have had, you know, kind of tungsten and blue. I think that could have looked quite nice and separated them kind of from the rooftop here, but you know, also works like this, a little bit more bleak, which fits with the subject matter. I think this is just before they go to the upside down, but I could be wrong. And then yeah, exact same thing with the values. Look at this, 50%. Most of the image exists below that. And presumably, this isn't something I've looked into too much, but presumably, depending on the camera model you're working with, you'd want to shoot this at a lower ISO. It's very counterintuitive, but at lower ISOs, you're allotting more of your dynamic range to shadows, and therefore you have the details in the shadows. You know, say you have 15, 16 stops of dynamic range, and you want to allocate most of that to shadows. You'd want to shoot with a lower ISO, and then just pump more light in until you get your proper values. But that's going to help expand, you know, everything 50% and below, middle gray and below. So presumably, I'm not too sure, but if I had to guess, they were shooting at ISO 400, or maybe they're just right at the camera's native ISO of 800. I think that's pretty common of most cameras, but who knows? It'd be interesting if I could ask someone who was on the set. But yeah, same thing. Most of this image is existing 50% IRE and below. Some of the skin tones here, yeah, very soft light here. Hitting her here, very soft along the nose, very frontal almost, because there's no shadow being created down here, like down her face here. Probably some negative fill just off screen here, just to fill in all these shadows and help create that depth. But yeah, that's it for this image. This one's quite flat, but something I wanted to talk about here. You might be wondering, well, how did they get such even values across their face, even from this guy to him? So this is, you know, just at 50% IRE. This pretty close. It's definitely lower. You can see these values being represented over here to the right of the screen. So the brightest part on him, just about 50 IRE. Then here on his cheek, just about 50 IRE as well. Some of the bright spots peak a little bit higher, but pretty even. And you might be wondering, well, if the light is right here, why isn't he so much brighter than him? They're probably doing something placing the light way off to the right of this guy, left from our orientation, probably way off here. The further out you go, the more even the value the light will be at a distance because of the inverse square law. So if they placed the light right here, just off screen, the light that's hitting him is going to be way brighter than him because there's a greater fall off. The further that distance increases, the more consistent it's going to be. So if you have just a single light source here and you want this person to be the same value as him, instead of putting it a foot off screen here, maybe move it back 15, 20 feet. And you'll have to crank it a lot higher, but you're going to get light which is even from this distance here. So I hope that's not too confusing, but that's kind of what they're doing here. And then as for all these frames, they probably just have negative fill over here, just to help fill in the shadow side, but maybe not. There's going to be shadows anyway if they don't have a light on this side. But yeah, that's this frame. I bet with the vector scope we're just going to see something which, yeah, not too contrasty, but check this out. A lot of blue, kind of greenish, and some yellow. Costume design helps here. Really yellow on the scarf. The general atmosphere is just green, kind of bluish. That's probably just some color grade. See if we can subtract some of that magenta out. Maybe go to offset. Take some of that out. We're not going to be able to see too much here, but yeah, such a small difference. But once you cycle through, especially kind of in these shadows, you guys probably won't be able to see anything, but very green, very blue, and just correcting that out with a little bit of magenta, going to offset, pushing a little bit of kind of orange in. Very subtle. But yeah, that's how you can create kind of some even light across like an entire frame here. Just move the light back and just blast it. Yeah, immediately apparent is how greenish blue these are. And look how much it helps that they're in the desert, because you have this nice yellow, kind of reddish to complement everything else they're pushing in. And obviously skin tones are going to be pushed toward that as well. And yeah, look at that. Cyan and yellowish red. Orange. That's what it'd be called, isn't it? Yellowish red. Just orange. This really helps. So check this out here. Obviously, costume design, set design. Yellow here, red. Check this out. Red, orange, orange, yellow, green, blue. Nothing that's contrasty. That's your color palette right there, represented on this book. And then for this waveform, it's the same thing. This is obviously brighter. They're outside. You have all these windows. Maybe they have a bit of parchment here, diffusing or bringing the level down on each of these windows, but probably not. Maybe they just have a massive sheet above attached to the car to soften all this up. Or maybe they just shot it at the right time of day. But same thing, everything's pretty low, even on this exterior daytime. Most of the image, especially everything in here, is pretty low. That's just standard with all these frames. This one we kind of looked at already, but we can begin to see kind of the difference here between putting the camera on the shadow side of the face versus the side that the key is coming from. I say key, but just the main light source is coming from. So with this character here, light is right here, just somewhere right off here. And we can see just the bright side of his face. I mean, we see some shadows here, but not too much. I mean, there's obviously some under his eye, But let's talk about shaping like the cheek and everything. With this, it's a very flat image. If we just looked at this, it looks very 2D. Compared to Elle's face here. And the idea is that putting the camera on the shadow side really helps shape that face. Because seeing the shadow, seeing the bright part here immediately transition to shadow really helps make this 2D image look a little bit more 3D. Almost like, if you draw a circle, but then you shade it in on one side and make that gradient very smooth, you now have a sphere. So something just like this. We can kind of see it in our eyes where that light is. So based on her eye right here, right here, we can just look at him and tell that it's just off screen here, blasted down at him. And the same thing, so check out L from bright, and then transition to shadow here, and then you have a nice hair light. It almost looks like an interview. Obviously a bit dramatic for an interview, but right here, got the hair light separating her from the background. Kind of see it touching her ear as well. That's a really nice frame. Very symmetrical. Right down the middle. And obviously blue and orange. So a pretty cursory glance at some of these, but we can start to see a trend being developed. Even in some of these darker shots, there's always something blue. There's always a bit of cyan blue. Look at the light coming in through here. Very, very greenish blue. And then very warm candle here. And set design. Props. Very, very, you have red, you have orange. You got this blue hat here. You're not going to see a massive purple cup sitting right here. That just wouldn't work. Got these tungsten bulbs, very tungsten. Even the light above him, very tungsten. And you're like, oh, there's a light on his face right here. Where is that? It's probably just right below this right here. Just shooting up into his face. It's also quite soft. Very nice. Then, if we're looking at the levels, everything's below 50%, except for these accents. It's a great way to, just generally, with some of these dark scenes, in order to make it not look too boring, like there's not enough contrast, just put little pops of highlights. They're very bright, but they're just little pops of highlight. Skin tone's super low. Everything's 20% and below. Throw a false color on there. Yeah. Face right there, around 20, 25. Same with this, around 20. Some of the brightest parts peaking like around here. Right around 50, 60. Obviously you have these little specks of highlights around 90, 100. But that is the exception. So, yeah, just a little pop of green. Same thing with this. You can even see, kind of down on this, you have that greenish blue in the ambience. Look at her jacket. Green, greenish blue, yellow, little accents. Excuse me. And obviously tungsten light here. Look at how much haze exists in the image to help soften this up. Let's look at the previous. Yeah, not as much haze, but definitely some haze back here. Just to help soften this up. Same thing with this. Massive amounts of haze to soften this up. And look at that waveform. Everything's super low and just like a volcano. Kind of spikes in the middle. Draws all your attention right to the middle. This helps frame the shot. Pushing through. Nice framing. Looking at all this. Without this, if you say, maybe if you had a light just out here, maybe shooting like a strip of light here, and then putting, a window panel in front of it so it looks like a window here, that would take a lot of attention away from this. So you're really just using this just to frame it up, and you have some strips of light, just to remind us where you are. Vector scope. Look at that. Where's this cyan coming from? Let's see if I can pull this back up. Well, of course, look at that. Costume design right there. We're looking down here. You have blue and orange, cyan and yellow. Really pushing that with costuming. Obviously blue jeans, but also this. Check this out. When I hover over this spot right here, where the light's coming through the window, very cyan. They're clearly putting some gel on those lights, helping to accentuate that kind of blue and orange look here. It's very colorful, very saturated. We really pushed it. There you go. That's more apparent. Look at how blue and orange this is. Very, very blue and orange. Okay. And I think we're getting pretty close to the end here. Or at least we're going to have to be. I might have to jump ahead considering there's a storm rolling through. I don't want to fry my computer, because then instead of a couple weeks of not having me, it would be a couple months probably. So let's jump to this image here. I can already see the trend continues. This isn't even something I noticed when I was watching this season, just how blue and orange it was. But look at that. Full screen this here. That is almost to the outer limits of the saturation. Very cyan and orange. Look at how saturated that is. Nice tungsten just off screen here. Pushing down on him. And check this out. Shadow side of the face. So you have basically just hair lights hitting him here with a little bit of wrap just here. Just bring these levels up slightly. And then we're on the shadow side. So from bright, smooth gradation all the way down to dark. And they probably have some negative fill right here. And then they have this nice hair light over on this side as well to separate them from being the same value as this. And it also happens to be very tungsten, almost artificially tungsten. I mean, obviously it is artificial, but they're pushing it really, really strong. And then these just back here, out of focus, but very, very blue. Just kind of blooming all over this whole wall. It's very bluish green. Contrasts really nicely with this orange. So a very, very cinematic image. Very kind of textbook cinematic, where it's blue and orange, very high contrast. And if I had to guess, this is probably around 50, 60 IRE. These are around 70, maybe 75. His face is dipping down to like 15 IRE here. Let's see if I'm anywhere close. I said these are about 70. Okay, well, everybody's wrong every once in a while. So these are pretty much peaking right at 100. But up here I call it about 50. 60, yeah, so right at 50. Brightest part of his face is around 50. Very quickly falling off. Look at that. So far down. 20 IRE as you get down here. Very close to black. Very close. And then it comes back up with this backlight. You can see it framing the ear, touching the top of the head, wrapping around, separating from that background. And obviously pure black down here. Pure black, no detail. You don't need it. He's wearing a black shirt. And then just in case it's hard to tell on YouTube, look at this. Saturation boosted to 100. I mean, this looks terrible now, but look at this. Just blue and orange. That's what this entire image is, and nothing else. There's no other values in here. Very pleasant image. Very, very pleasant. I'm going to call it at this one because the storm is really coming through now and I don't want to fry my computer. So for the next video, I will find my tripod so y'all can see my face again. It's probably a little bit boring without seeing that, seeing me make awkward faces trying to figure out what's going on in these images. But I hope this was a pretty informative video, not as much going into like breaking down, I don't know, each individual color of the shadows, midtones, and highlights, but definitely looking at the frames and seeing what they're doing, what's present in them. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know what show or what movie you would like for me to see next and take a look at, and I'll jump on it.